The rose that we know today evolved from rose-like plants that lived in the Northern Hemisphere 33 million years ago. When you plant roses in your garden, you are leaving a legacy for future generations, as roses can live significantly longer than humans. The oldest known living rose is believed to be 700 years old. Called the 1,000-year rose, also known as the Rose of Hildesheim, it's a wild dog rose that climbs the apse of Hildesheim Cathedral to a height of 33 feet. The rose has always been valued in many cultures throughout the ages. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, is said to have named the rose in honour of her son, Eros, the god of love and desire. Eros later gave the rose to Harpocrates, the god of silence, as a bride. Hence, the rose became symbolic of secrecy, silence, and love. This story was carried on into Roman mythology, with the protagonists replaced by their gods, Flora, Venus, Cupid, and Bacchus. And so the rose became a visual symbol of the need for secrecy and discretion. Roses were carved into the ceilings and walls of public rooms, courtrooms, and Catholic confessionals as a reminder that all conversations should be kept confidential. From the Middle Ages, a rose was often suspended from the ceiling of a government council chamber to ensure the secrecy of proceedings. Therefore, sub rosa, translation under the rose, became a quasi-legal term that is still in use today to denote something that is best kept under wraps. Roses became emblems employed by the nobility, and so took on a symbolic political significance. When the right to the crown of England was disputed by the House of Lancaster, represented by a red rose, and the House of York, represented by a white rose, the conflict became known as the War of the Roses. Resolution of that civil war resulted in the Lancastrian Henry Tudor being crowned King of England. He married Elizabeth of York and united the symbolic white and red roses to form the Tudor rose. The form of this double rose can be seen carved extensively into Tudor buildings and furniture, and painted into portraits of the time, symbolising for all time a united country. Nowadays, the genus Rosa encompasses around 150 species of erect, climbing or trailing perennial shrubs with thousands of varieties. Roses are classified into three types: species, the familiar wild rose; Old World roses introduced before 1867, and modern roses. The process of turning the wild rose into a garden plant of infinite variety began a long time ago. The first domesticated roses may have been deliberately cultivated as early as 3000 BCE in China. They were used in the making of rose water and in perfumed oils for medicinal purposes and as confetti for celebrations. The philosopher Confucius recorded that roses were growing in the gardens of the imperial palace in 500 BCE, and the Chinese emperor's library contained a large number of books on the subject. China was the sole source of yellow roses, and all their present-day descendants, as there are no wild roses in Europe with that coloration. The ancient Egyptians bathed in rose water and scattered rose petals to make their rooms sweet-smelling. The Romans grew roses extensively in large public gardens, and Rosa alba could be found in the gardens of nobles and monks in medieval Europe, widely thought to have been spread there by visiting Romans. Every medieval monastery had its botanist monk cultivating roses alongside other plants and herbs to be used in religious ceremonies. It has been the continuing intervention of botanists and plant breeders that has transformed the wild rose into a consistent garden plant. Roses raised from seed do not retain the characteristics of their parents. Cuttings have to be taken to maintain the variety. So an old rose today can be said to be a living link with a rose that once grew in a medieval garden. Old roses often do not bloom for as long as their cultivated descendants, and their colours are more pastel and less showy. However, they are hardy and do not require the same degree of attention and maintenance as a modern hybrid. They also still exude the strong fragrances that come from their wild ancestors. The next major step in the development of the rose came when hybridizers crossed the ancient China rose with the European Rosa gigantea. The result has a smell that was said to be reminiscent of a cup of China tea, and so it was nicknamed the tea rose. Another crossing a few years later blended the damask rose with some other species roses that blossomed freely for many years and so were named hybrid perpetuals. The final chapter in this particular rose story was written in the mid-19th century when tea roses were crossed with hybrid perpetuals and the hybrid tea rose was born. Its large flowers and vigorous long-lived flowering habits have made it the most popular type of rose in the world. Modern roses began with hybrid teas and were soon joined by floribundas and grandifloras. The former were cultivated in the late 19th century by the Dutch Paulsen Company, still in existence today. Its hybridizers crossed dwarf China roses with small hybrid teas to produce compact shrubs with multiple clusters of small double flowers. Grandiflora roses began life in the 1950s as crosses between hybrid teas and floribundas. These tall, hardy bushes with full-blossomed flowers are the most familiar garden roses today, but they do not produce the same level of fragrance as old world roses. Nowadays, new hybrids spring up every year from many different growers around the world as the quest for the perfect rose goes on. Meanwhile, species roses keep the original gene pool alive and old roses maintain a loyal following, prized for their natural growth and strong perfume. History is continually being written in the world of rose cultivation.